going to put a whole bunch of different things in here. So this is the smoker, and what we do is we get a little bit of fire going in there. My name is Richard Clapper, and I'm a beekeeper here in Peru, Mass. It started out as a hobby. It's not a business, so you're never going to get rich in beekeeping unless you start selling bees, but then you have to have the state inspector come in and do all sorts of inspections before you can sell bees. So there's rules and regulations about selling bees. We do sell a little honey when we do farmers markets. I do talks at libraries and at the Bascom Lodge for the last 3 years. And other specialty events. We have a garden, so years ago, 6 years ago, we decided we would get bees just to help out with our gardens. And it went from, okay, now I've got a beehive to 2 or 3 beehives to 10, and now it's up close to 30. So it went from just being a little fun thing to now it's my mainline addiction, passion, a little compulsive, I guess. So what happens is the bees think there's a fire. They have 2 stomachs. They have a stomach that they use for digestion, and then they have a honey stomach that they use for transporting honey from the flowers or nectar from the flowers to the hive. They fill both of their stomachs, so that gives them what they need in case there is a real fire. They think that there is a fire, so they're going to have as much food with them as possible. And then, because, get that going real good and then we'll put it out. Because of the, because they have their stomachs full, they can't physically bend their rear end around to sting you. So by having the fire thought in their head, they're so full of honey that they can't physically sting you. They still can sting, but it's a lot harder for them to sting you. So it does that. The other thing it does is it covers all the pheromones of fear. So if you squish a bee, that bee releases tons of pheromones, alarm pheromones for the whole hive. By putting a little smoke in there, it calms that pheromone down. They don't realize what's going on. And squishing bees, unfortunately, is part of beekeeping. We try not to, but it is something that's inevitable. So what I like to do is get a real good heavy fire going in there and then extinguish it so you have just smoke and smoldering. And that keeps the smoker going for a long time. One of the worst problems with getting into the bees, and if you do have a situation and your smoker's out, then the situation can get out of hand quickly. So by having a good smoker going with a lot of smoldering in the bottom and then put something cool on top, then that keeps your smoker going. And I've had it going for 2 hours if you're in the hives that long, if you have enough fuel in there. So tight around the waist, tight around the neck. The suit is basically a little thicker than normal clothes so that the bees can't sting through it. And then the veil covers your face because you really don't want to get stung in the face. We can get stung in the hands and the arms and the legs, and it doesn't really bother us that much. It's annoying. You might get a little welt. If you get the stinger out immediately, there will be less of a welt. If it stays in for a longer time, it's going to be worse. If you get stung in the face because your face is so sensitive, the face will swell up, and if you can't see, you can't drive. So you really need to protect your face. A lot of the old beekeepers will just wear a veil and just a t-shirt or shorts and not worry about it. Most of us try not to get stung. I've only been stung once this year, and that's because I sat on one. If you're in, and I'm in the bees every day between all the hives that I have. So if you're cautious and know how to approach the bees, it's really not a big deal. And most of the work, 99% of the work that's done in the hive is done from behind the hive, so that the bees that are coming and going, the foraging bees, can still get in and out of their hive without being in your way. A good hive, one of the stronger, taller hives that are behind us, is probably got about 60 to 80,000 bees. When they hit 80,000 or around there, and it could be at 60 or 70 or 80,000, they get to a critical mass in the hive, and half the bees will swarm, the other half will stay in the hive and raise a new queen. So that's how we're able to propagate the species, is by letting them swarm or do a mechanical swarm. And the last 3 weeks, we've got 6 swarms out of this Berkshire County. It's a benefit to us as well as people who might have gardens in the area. What I've been doing is I've been moving bees to farms. I have 6 hives in downtown Pittsfield at Brattle Farm. I have 2 hives at a farm in Lanesboro and 2 hives at another hive place, as well as in Dalton. So there is benefits to other people as well. If you're not allergic to bees and you want to have bees, it would be really good to become a member of the Northern Berkshire Beekeepers Association, because there's a whole umbrella of people that can help you out. For normal people, just to have bees is probably not a good thing. You really need to be on top of it, and it's a hands-on type thing. You can't just take bees, put them in your backyard, and forget about them. You'll have issues. Either they'll swarm, they'll not make it through the winter, and there's a lot of diseases and mites that are in the beehives right now that are compromising the viability of bees. Not just honeybees, but a lot of bees. Okay. But if you look in these comb here, this is all wax that the bees produce with a gland on the side of their body. Inside of there is a fresh laid egg. Right through this section here, there's a little white dot. Can you see that?
I do, yeah.
So those are brand new eggs that the queen just laid. So the queen was on this frame probably within the last couple hours, or at least within the last day, because those are all freshly laid. So what we have here is, this is all pollen. If you see the yellowish orange that's packed into the hive, that's all pollen. But this is all eggs that's brood, that's underneath the capped comb. This is what we call crazy comb, because they're only supposed to build it on the frames, and they're just building this little piece here out of where it's not supposed to be. I don't see a queen on here. Let me flip it over this way. See if we can get the sun on it. Can you, with the sunlight, can you see the larvae in here? This is all eggs that are 5 days or more old. They look like little shrimp. Can you get that? Let's see, let me see where they are. Right here, this section right here.
Oh, so the brighter yellow.
In the bottom of the comb.
Yep.
There's a little white, almost
gotcha, yep.
Looks like a larvae. And if you want to look right here, this is the queen. This one, right underneath my finger, she's going this way. She has a longer abdomen right here. She's on the wooden part of the frame up here. Let me grab my hive tool. I can point her out a little bit better.
Kind of bigger and longer, right?
Yes, this is her right here. This is the queen. She's got a much longer abdomen. She's now going over this way. So these guys, this is a female worker bee. This is a male drone. This one right here, larger with a bigger butt. This one on my hive tool, and then the queen is over here walking away. There's a good picture of the queen. For the whole species, they pollinate about 70% of the foods that we eat, starting with almonds, apples, all the way down through the alphabet, down to zucchinis. Almonds, blueberries, and cranberries are some of the things that the biggest commercial people bring their bees to California for the almonds. There's about 800,000 hives are brought to California from all over the United States to pollinate the almonds. After the almond crop is pollinated, a lot of those bees will then go to Maine to do wild blueberries, and from there they'll go to Cape Cod, and then they'll go back to Florida and Georgia to do the citrus. So there's a big, huge commercial agriculture that's basically right around the honeybees moving around the United States. Well, Einstein said many years ago that 4 years after the bees are gone, so will the human race. We really rely on them for 70% of the food that we eat. Anything that's in the gardens that needs pollination, is 90% of it's done by honeybees. Well, colony collapse disorder is an umbrella term that covers all losses of bees. So it may not be specific to colony collapse, but I'll give you a quick example of what happened with us in the last few weeks with one of my hives, which would probably be considered a colony collapse situation. The hive swarmed. We were able to catch that first swarm. It's a great swarm. The hive swarmed again. We were able to catch that swarm. It's a little smaller. The hive has since swarmed again, so now that's the third swarm. The third swarm was about the size of a softball. That swarm will probably not make it. But it also, the hive that they all swarm from has now been weakened to the point where there's no new eggs and brood to hatch out to keep that hive viable. So in a few weeks, that hive will collapse. We can fix that. I can fix that myself. A lot of new beekeepers may not be able to deal with that, but because I have so many hives here, I can take care of that. But if in 4 or 5 weeks, if you went in and the bees were all dead, or you wouldn't find dead bees because they all swarmed, you would say this is a typical colony collapse situation. And it may not be. It may be that they just sent off so many swarms that they actually absconded from the original hive and weren't leaving a hive that was viable. We as beekeepers believe that a lot of it is pesticides. We as the United States pour more pesticides on our soil than almost every other country in the world. The problem with that is that the bees can probably handle one pesticide, or they might be able to handle a different pesticide, but when you compound those pesticides together, it just is too toxic for the bees to handle. And with these hives, they need about 70 to 100 pounds of honey to make it through the winter. If the honey that's in the hive has the pesticides in it, and they're feeding that to the young in the wintertime or in early spring, that could be why they're not making it through. The young are deformed, and they just they're not viable to keep the hive going. So the bees die from that. In the Boston area, they tested for a neonicotinoid pesticide, and 70% of the hives tested positive for that pesticide. They didn't test for a lot of other pesticides, but that was the one they were looking for, and they did find it in most of the hives. Buy local, yep. Support your local beekeepers. We started to talk about new beekeepers getting involved. In order for somebody to get involved in beekeeping, it's about $1,000 investment just for the hives, the bees, the suits, the tools, all the things that you need. You're not really going to make a lot of money on the honey, but you by supporting local beekeepers, it gives us a little chance to get ahead on some of our equipment. They can call me, or they can call the Northern Berkshire Beekeepers. There's a website for the Northern Berkshire Beekeepers, and if somebody sends an email saying we've got bees either in a tree or in a barn or house, whatever, car sometimes they get into, somebody from the club can help them out.
What shouldn't people do?
They shouldn't go in poking at them. And the situation I was talking about earlier, somebody found a swarm in a tree, put a plastic bag over the swarm, cut the branch, and then took the bees and just threw them in a field. Well, the bees got so hot in the bag that 99% of them died. It wasn't anything that was viable. Had they called somebody or done a Google search and looked for beekeepers that were local, they would have found dozens of people that would have been anxious to help out and take those bees, put them into a hive, and they would have been a viable hive. Instead, they were just thrown away as garbage. So there is people that are willing to help out people who have bees in their house, barn, whatever. We're very happy to do it. And most of us don't charge for it. If you have allergies to spring flowers, you should try and eat spring honey. If you have allergies to goldenrod in the fall, you should try and eat some goldenrod honey. And there is quite a bit of difference between the spring honey, which is a very thin, light-colored honey, and the fall honey, which is a very dark honey. So there is a lot of nuances in between the year too.
Okay. Tell me about queen bees. How important are queen bees?
There's only one queen in each hive. And without the queen, within 4 to 6 weeks, the hive will definitely collapse. Yep, she's right here. She's got a white dot on her back.
Oh, yeah, there we go. And you did the white dot.
Yeah, we put the white dot on their back so that we know how old they are. So any queen that was born in 2016 has a white dot. The queens that are born in 2017 are going to have a yellow dot. And we just basically reach in, we grab her out of there, we put her into a special marking tube, we put a little dot on her, we wait for it to dry, and then we just put her back in again. A good queen, which we've got several in here now that are laying about 2,000 eggs a day. So she lays her body weight every single day in the summertime. Starting around April or so, as soon as the weather starts to change and the sun starts to be longer days, she'll start laying like crazy. So if you figure 2,000 eggs a day, as they're hatching out in a few weeks, 2,000 eggs will be hatching into new bees. In a week or so, you can have another 10,000 bees, which builds up the colony pretty quickly. That's why the swarming happens this time of year. The bees build up so quick that they get to a critical mass in the hive, and half the bees, like I said, will leave and half will stay with a new queen. The first thing is to know what you're doing before you go in. You want to have a plan of what you're going to do before you go in, as opposed to just going in and fumbling around, because when you go into the beehive, you disturb the bees' normal flow. And the least amount of time that you can spend in the hive is the best for the bees. So if you have a plan, okay, this is what we're looking for, you go in, you find that, and you get out, as opposed to tearing the whole thing apart. It's similar to having a tornado come through your house. If your house is in totally disarray after we've been in the bees, it'd be similar to that. And you really just want to go in, do what you have to do, and get out as quick as possible. Try not to confuse them too much, and try and put them back the same way you took them apart. They have an order in the hive that is sequenced the way they're doing it, and if you put things back the wrong way, you can confuse the heck out of the bees, which is not good for them. It'll take them longer to get going back up again. So you want to know what you're doing, get in, get out as quick as possible, and try not to harm as many bees. The reason we have the electric fence is not to keep the bees in, but it's to keep the bears out.